Have you ever met someone who knows a little, or actually a lot, about almost everything? Like, you bring up astronomy and they go deep. You switch to medieval history and they're still with you. You mention quantum mechanics or Renaissance art, and suddenly they're the one teaching you something. Now here's the real question. Was that person, by any chance, an INTJ? Because here's what's fascinating, and honestly, a little mind-blowing. There's a quiet pattern hiding in plain sight. Some of the most well-known polymaths in human history, people like Isaac Newton, Nikola Tesla, and even the legendary Leonardo da Vinci, share personality traits that line up almost perfectly with what we call the INTJ type. So are INTJs actually born polymaths? Or is that just a flattering coincidence? By the end of this video, you're going to see INTJs in a completely different light. We're going deep into psychology, into history, into the very wiring of the INTJ brain, and we're pulling out the surprising truth that most people completely overlook. Let's get into it. What even is a polymath? Before we connect the INTJ type to polymathy, we need to be clear on what that word actually means. A polymath isn't just someone who reads a lot of books or has a bunch of hobbies. The word comes from the Greek polymaths, having learned much. But the real definition goes further than that. A polymath is someone who develops serious expertise, not just surface-level knowledge, across multiple, often unrelated fields. The catch? True polymathy requires both breadth and depth at the same time. That's a much rarer combination than most people assume. Think Leonardo da Vinci. Painter, engineer, anatomist, musician, botanist. Not someone who dabbled. Someone who went all the way down in every direction he pointed himself. So when someone says INTJs are natural polymaths, they're making a bold claim. And bold claims deserve a closer look. NIT. The engine behind the reputation. Here's where things get genuinely interesting. INTJs lead with a cognitive function called Introverted Intuition, NI, paired closely with extrovert thinking, TE. NI doesn't process information in a straight line. It works more like a vast underground network, absorbing input from wildly different sources and quietly synthesizing it into deep pattern recognition. It's the function that wakes you up at 3 a.m. with a fully formed insight you hadn't consciously been working on. It's what makes an INTJ look at two completely unrelated fields, say architecture and evolutionary biology, and suddenly see a connection nobody else in the room has noticed. And here's why this matters. You can't develop cross-domain pattern recognition if you only operate in one domain. NI feeds on breadth. It thrives on complexity. The more diverse the input, the sharper and more powerful the synthesis. When an INTJ finds themselves pulled toward philosophy, mathematics, history, and systems theory all at once, that's not random wandering. That's NI doing exactly what it was built to do. Then there's TE, the organizer. Where NI generates the vision and the cross-domain hunger, TE takes those flashes of insight and turns them into structured, workable framework. It's what makes an INTJ not just interested in something, but driven to understand it completely, to build a model of it, test it, refine it, and apply it. Most people with wide-ranging interests stay scattered because they lack a strong organizing principle. INTJs, with TE running alongside NI, don't just explore, they systematize. They build a coherent intellectual architecture out of what they find. In many ways, the NI-TE pairing is the psychological blueprint of the polymath. One function generates the vision. The other turns it into mastery. The mastery obsession. Here's something people outside the INTJ world often underestimate. For an INTJ, half-knowledge is almost physically uncomfortable. When an INTJ gets truly interested in something, they don't want the beginner's overview. They want the entire thing, from the ground up. They want to understand not just how it works, but why it works, what its limitations are, how it connects to other systems, and what it reveals about the deeper structure of reality. This is why INTJs can shock you in conversation. You might meet one who, on the surface, seems like a software engineer. Then the topic shifts to the fall of Rome, and suddenly they're explaining the economic and military factors with the same analytical depth they'd bring to debugging a codebase. Then music theory. Then evolutionary psychology. Same depth every time. That's not performance. That's what genuine multi-domain knowledge looks like when it lives inside a mind that cannot learn something without going all the way in. Nature versus nurture, what the research actually says. So is all of this just genetics? Not quite, and this is where the story gets more nuanced than most people want it to be. Behavioral genetics research on twins suggests that personality traits are moderately heritable. But moderately is the key word. It's nowhere near a guarantee, and it hands nobody a finished skill set at birth. A person might inherit a temperament that leans curious, analytical, and independent, which absolutely helps, but inheriting a cognitive style is not the same as inheriting mastery in chemistry, music theory, and architecture. Nature loads the gun. Nurture is still the one that pulls the trigger. There's also strong neurological evidence that NI correlates with heightened activity in the brain's default mode network, the region associated with internal simulation, abstract pattern processing, and connecting distant ideas. So the hardware for polymathic thinking does appear to be present from birth in INTJ. But hardware without the right environment never gets to run its best software. An INTJ raised with no access to books, mentors, or room to explore is not going to magically become a polymath because their brain is wired a certain way. Multipotentiality, the real term hiding behind the myth. There's actually a precise term for what people are usually pointing at when they call INTJs natural polymaths. And it's not polymathy at all. It's multipotentiality. This concept comes from gifted education research and describes people who show strong ability and genuine interest across several different domains at once. Multipotentiality is potential. It's raw material, not the finished statue. Plenty of INTJ kids show this early, bouncing between chess, science fair projects, and creative writing with equal intensity, and the adults around them start whispering the word genius a little too soon. But potential left unattended doesn't turn into mastery on its own. That gap between promise and payoff is exactly where the polymath myth tends to fall apart. Why the internet loves this story. Let's be honest about something. A significant portion of the INTJ polymath reputation lives on the internet, not in peer-reviewed psychology journals. MBTI communities online attract a very specific, vocal slice of each type. The INTJs who post the most are often the ones eager to talk about their latest deep dive or side project. That creates a skewed sample. A handful of loud, high-achieving voices end up representing a personality type of millions. Add confirmation bias. Once you believe INTJs are polymaths, you notice every example that fits and quietly ignore the ones who never finished a single hobby, and you've got yourself a self-fulfilling internet legend. It's a good story. It's just not the whole truth. The trap, a mile wide, an inch deep. Here's the part nobody likes to say out loud. The same wide-ranging curiosity that makes polymathy possible can just as easily become a trap. Because INTJs are driven by internal standards, there's a quiet perfectionism at work beneath the surface. If early progress in a new skill doesn't feel impressive fast enough, some INTJs will simply abandon it rather than push through the slow, awkward middle stage that every skill demands. So instead of polymaths, they end up with a graveyard of half-finished projects and a shelf of half-read books, which is, honestly, the exact opposite of what the reputation promises. This is where deliberate practice becomes non-negotiable. Decades of expertise research point to one consistent factor above almost everything else: structured, sustained practice over time. NI-driven pattern recognition speeds up the early stages, but it doesn't replace the reps. Skipping them because I should already be naturally good at this is exactly how promising multipotentiality quietly fizzles out before it becomes anything close to mastery. Historical figures and the pattern they share. Newton didn't just give us gravity. He co-invented calculus, made foundational contributions to optics, and spent decades on theology and alchemy, all driven by the same obsessive need to find the underlying laws governing reality. Tesla spoke 8 languages, visualized complete three-dimensional mechanical systems in his mind before building them, and worked alone through the night for years. Da Vinci's notebooks reveal a mind in constant search of patterns and first principles, treating art and science not as separate pursuits, but as two angles of attack on the same question: how does the world actually work? Can we say with certainty these figures were INTJs? No, typing historical figures is always an imperfect exercise. But the fingerprints are consistent: a preference for working alone, an obsession with underlying principles, a high internal standard that kept them going long after others would have stopped. And more than anything else, the sheer number of hours each of them reportedly poured into their work, in solitude, across years, before anything resembling mastery showed up. The honest truth. So, are INTJs born polymaths? No, not in the sense of guaranteed, automatic mastery across multiple fields. That idea oversimplifies both genetics and how skill actually develops. What INTJs are often born with, or develop remarkably early, is a specific cognitive disposition: sharp pattern recognition, restless cross-domain curiosity, and a low tolerance for shallow understanding. That combination makes the road toward polymathy noticeably shorter and smoother than it is for most personality types. But it's still a road that has to be walked, one deliberate step at a time. The myth oversells the born part while completely underselling how much unglamorous, repetitive effort real polymath status demands. Nature hands INTJs a decent head start. Nurture and grit are still the ones who finish the race. What it actually takes. If you're an INTJ and you want to actually develop this side of yourself, here's the practical version. Structure your curiosity instead of letting it run wild. Pick 2 or 3 fields at a time rather than 10, and give each one enough runway to move past the frustrating beginner stage. Build a meta framework. Find the common thread connecting your domains of interest and let that overarching question guide your exploration. That's an INTJ working in full sync. Use one field as a lens for another. When Leonardo studied anatomy, he brought his engineering mind to it. When you deeply understand one field, let that understanding illuminate the next. The cross-domain insights you generate that way will be original in ways that purely specialized thinking simply cannot produce. And don't apologize for breadth. In a world that rewards narrow specialization, it can feel irresponsible to have wide-ranging intellectual interests. But history has shown, again and again, that the people who change the world are often the ones who pull ideas from wildly different places and combine them in ways nobody expected. The polymath isn't someone who couldn't commit. The polymath is someone who understood, maybe before anyone else did, that the most interesting truths don't live inside any single field. They live in the spaces between fields. And if anyone was built to find those spaces, it's the INTJ.